introduce myself. I guess there is a connection between us. My name is Melinda Power. I live in Chicago. I'm Margaret Power, and I live in Chicago. And studies have shown that twins have a natural-born empathy for the world. Studies that she studied. So we are both members of the Illinois Coalition Against Torture, which is obviously in Illinois, particularly a Chicago group. And although not here right now, Bob Clark, who's a member of the Committee to Defend the Bill of Rights, is a very active and essential member of our organization. We wanted to give you some brief information about the group, and particularly focusing on the anti-torture resolution that we got successfully passed. So ICAT, we call it ICAT, Illinois Coalition Against Torture, was formed in December, almost, I guess, 2.5, going on 3 years ago. And we formed particularly based on a call from NARCAT, which is the National Religious Coalition Against Torture. So there's a very strong religious component of the organization, but it's also, it's a secular organization with a strong religious component, would be a fair way to say it. But we've worked very closely with NARCAT from our inception. And we formed particularly because at that time there was talk about transferring people, inmates from Guantanamo, to a prison in Western Illinois. That ultimately didn't happen, but that was a bit of the impetus for ICAT coming into formation. And from the beginning, we felt that in focusing on torture, we understand torture to be a systematic issue. Thus, we decided that basically we focus on the three aspects of torture, particularly in Chicago, which Margaret will be talking a little bit more about. We focused about police torture and the infamous John Burge case, which I think you'll be talking about. Okay. He's a police commander who has had a history, along with his crew, of torturing mainly black men who were brought in for questioning around criminal activity. The torture started in the 80s, so we wanted to focus on that aspect of torture, i.e. local police. We also wanted to focus on torture in prisons, which we defined among other areas as solitary confinement, and then we wanted to focus on the issues of U.S. government-sponsored torture abroad, i.e. Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, and other areas. And that's sort of our mission statement to the extent we have one. That torture is a systematic issue that cannot be separated out and needs to be understood as something that happens throughout U.S. society. So that's the basis of our formation. So as a group, we, for our first 1.5 years of existence, we did a lot of things like public educational programs in order to build awareness. Because what we saw is that some people would focus on the Burge work, or some people would focus on the state prisons. More people would focus on the international aspects, and our goal was to try to have people see the links between all three. So we did a lot of educational programs. And then we decided, why don't we actually try and get the Chicago City Council to declare a resolution against torture? So in order to do that, what we found it was critical to do was actually work very closely with local government officials, in our case, one of the local aldermen. And this was critical for 2, possibly 3 reasons. One of them was that we needed to have someone, in a sense, on the inside, someone who would push the resolution through. We alone could not have done it. Secondly, and this was a point of contention that if any of you plan to do something like this, you may come up with, we had, in a sense, our ideal list of the resolution. This is what we think. We think that, for example, that we should pay reparations to the survivors of torture. The Chicago City Council should pay reparations to the survivors of torture. That we are demanding that we as citizens of Chicago, or at this point, taxpayers of Chicago, are paying Burge's pension, even though he is now in jail, not for torture, but for lying, for perjury, but we're still paying his pension, and we paid all his legal costs. So we said we want it, but those were sort of our maximum list, and what we discovered is that in order to get something through, we actually had to scale it down, and that was a bit of discussion within the group. Well, how can we have a resolution go forward that doesn't represent everything we want? And ultimately, within the group and through discussions with the alderman, he basically said, it will not pass if you do that. So we said, okay, we'll take it out. It's better to get it passed, sort of the minimum versus the maximum. And so that was a decision we made. And if any of you take up
that work or possibly any other work, you may come across some of those similar incidents, so you have to make a decision, are we willing to delete some of those really critical goals or not? So then we had, as I'm showing, a lot of discussions back and forth with the aldermen who ultimately supported it and then brought it before the city council. Okay, so I want to talk about the petition.
Sure.
Okay, so another point of discussion within the group was, why are we doing this? And for some people, getting it passed in city council, getting the resolution was enough. For others, okay, I was one of the others, said, no, we want to use this as an opportunity to educate people. So we developed a two-pronged strategy in the campaign building up to it. First of all, we did an online petition. And the importance of the online petition was that it went not just throughout the city of Chicago, it actually went international. And I don't know, has anybody in here signed it? Who in here signed the petition? I know you did, okay. A number of you signed the petition. In the case of Chicago, in our case, I'm very connected with Chile, and one of the members of the committee is a survivor of torture of Chile. So we had all these connections with Chileans, both in Chile and in exile. So there were Chileans from all over the world who also took up the petition and signed it. And the reason that was a strength for us is that when we presented the petitions, as we ultimately did to City Council, we were able to say, the Chicago wants to build itself as a world global city. We're saying, well, people around the world said that they opposed torture. So that was the online part of it. We also did a hard copy of it. And the hard copy, I'm just going to go into some of the issues right there. The hard copy we used to go talk to people. So the people who signed it online were basically people connected to social networks or political groups that were probably likely to sign it. Going out with a hard copy, you were going to meet people who support torture, who don't know about torture, who don't care about torture, and then people who oppose it. You'll meet the whole range. And so for us, that was a really great opportunity. I'm assuming everybody has done petitioning or something, door-to-door something in their life, so you know what it's like. You get the whole range. And one of the issues that came up for us specifically here in the city of Chicago was around Commander Burge. So I would say there would be general awareness that the U.S. government had carried out torture. That was not such a tough one in the city of Chicago. We are in Chicago. Much more difficult, but for some reason people didn't pay much attention to, was prisons. Solitary confinement. They just said whatever and signed it. The stickler for a lot of people was, and I will quote, what do you mean the Chicago police carry out torture? That was the toughest one that I found for people to sign. And what was it? You had a different reason?
Yeah,
oh, she had a different
internationally was the one I had the most.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Mine broke down completely on a racial thing. I think 90 to 95% of black people said, oh, Burge, of course I'll sign. Give it to me right away. What was remarkable to me was, I would say 60 to 70% of white people had no clue that Commander Burge existed, let alone that he had tortured black people.
Hundreds of them. This went on for decades.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now, if you lived in the city of Chicago and you were able to read, which I think probably we could say most people, you would know that. And to me, that was more a lesson of how we inhabit the same space, but we live in very different worlds, a lot of people. And those different worlds I'm a professor, and so I was talking to my students about Abu Ghraib about 6 months after it happened, and literally, it was a small class, there were only 10 students, so literally 70 said, Abu Ghraib, what's Abu Ghraib? And it wasn't because, there is no way, really, and it was because it didn't penetrate, it just didn't go into their consciousness, because they didn't care. It was fundamentally, they didn't view those black men on the South Side as people. They didn't view those people in Iraq as people, so who cares if they get tortured? So that's something we have to break through. So, we want to talk about, you had maybe the press conference hearing, or anything else?
Yeah. Oh, no. So then, at a certain point, the alderman basically said, okay, time to have hearings. So in his committee at City Hall, we first set up a press conference, which was very powerful. And here are some of the things that we found particularly powerful. One, mothers whose children have been tortured came and spoke with pictures of their children. It was very moving, and the press totally picked up on it. We also had a person from Chile who had been a survivor of torture, which also had impact. We had U.S. Congressperson Danny Davis, who got a lot of media coverage, and we had other law professors. We had history professors who talked about the history of torture. We had lawyers, a lawyer who had been involved in particularly the BORDC case. So we had the gamut of people who have both done work or been impacted by the issue of torture, and represented the spectrum of what we were trying to get passed in the resolution. And that was very effective. One lesson we learned from the press conference is don't have too many speakers. Shorter, concise, visually effective,
And personal stories. Actually, I
and
talked
personal
to
stories.
a newsman afterwards, and I said, so what could we have done better? He said, you know, Danny Davis and personal stories, that's all you need.
Right.
So the big name and people telling their personal stories, that's what will make the news, and that's what people will respond to.
Right. And we then went in and had the hearings at the city council, and there were not that many aldermen, which is what the local officials call, or alder people, whatever, who were there, but some of them who were there were very impacted by it. One of them had been in the Peace Corps in Rwanda, and had witnessed survivors of torture, and he stayed the entire time and was very impacted by it. And we then had a series of people talking about their personal history with torture, or, for example, Danny Davis spoke, etc. So that was very impactful. Then we presented all the petitions to the city council, and then there was a vote about 2 weeks later, I think, something like that. And the vote, it passed unanimously, but I cannot say that every single person, alderman, had read the resolution or passed it, but because of the support of the Human Rights Committee, which is who supported it, it then passed unanimously, although I will say Mayor Emanuel left the room when it was being voted on and discussed. So that was his way of not supporting it and not opposing it. But nonetheless, it got passed. And so I think our next steps are, where do we go from here now that the resolution has been passed? How do we make sure that people know about it? How do we help other people if they're interested? And how can we then try to make it have real impact in the city of Chicago? So what we are working on now and hope to have done, as Emily asked us, within a month or so, is a how-to guide that we would be happy to distribute to all of you, how to get an
It's going to be
anti-torture
an
resolution.
online guide with sort of, won't be exactly interactive, but it will not be just text. Somewhere between the two.
And that's basically, I think.
Well, one thing about the online petition.
Oh,
I
okay,
have
go
one
ahead.
question.
Oh.
Can you guys dig into that period when you got more to take a stand? You sort of glossed over that. You said 1 year in public education. What did that look like?
No,
'Cause that's what
no,
you
no,
should
oh,
tell you.
we did public education programs before we even thought of coming up with it.
Right, right. It was more like, oh, so what should we do now? Oh, let's have a resolution. That's really the concept. And then we even
We
more.
had worked with more before on
Right.
Anti-war, making Chicago an anti-war free zone, war-free zone. So we had a relationship with them, and I think one of the nuns in the group is very close with them. So we have personal connections and political connections, which really matters. And so our main advice is to try and figure out what most resonates with people in your local community, and then start with that, and then build onto the other. If you want to do this sort of tripartite discussion of torture, then build from there. But I was going to say something that really struck me. We did the online petition through Sign-On, which is part of Move On, and we repeatedly asked them to put the petition out, and they did not do it. And what really struck me, and
color changed too.
and color change too, and I don't know why they didn't either. I don't know why color change didn't, but because we felt it was not just a local issue, both the way we framed it and the way it could be used as an example. But what struck me is that they, MoveOn did put out an Occupy petition for the city of Chicago, and within something like 48 hours, it got 50,000 signatures. I could not help but think, well, I guess torture is not about, you know, these radical white people. It's about black people and people of color, and it's just not cool. Maybe that's not right, but I just thought, wow, it wasn't cool. But Occupy, I completely support Occupy. I think Occupy is the greatest. This is not a comment on Occupy. I think it's just sort of a comment on, we're up against a lot. If you can't put a resolution, it doesn't mean much of anything to say, yes, we'll sign on to that resolution and get it up there. So that was something that I understood. And maybe my analysis of why they didn't do it is wrong. I was sort of in charge of the petition. I wrote them so many times saying, please put it, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing this?
What was their answer?
Huh?
Did they answer?
No, they never answered.
Before we spend too much
Which
time
was-
beating up MoveOn, can we get other questions?
I just have a real quick question. How much in the resolution, how much exists to do your next step, what you're saying? How much accountability is it? Is there gonna be a report from the Chicago PD on torture? Is there gonna be you have a citizen review panel that's gonna be looking at this issue now? The city has obviously made a statement about torture. How is there accountability right now to monitor what they've agreed to do?
I don't think there's really accountability, and that is our next step.
Okay.
And that's actually, one of the members of ICAT has drafted a resolution that's more along those lines that we want to present. Maybe one more, but I have to go.
Yeah.
So quickly, could you comment on the relevance of Mayor Daley being, he will be produced by the city for deposition? Is that possibly an outcome of this resolution, or?
Mayor Daley is a former mayor who, before he was the mayor, was the head state's attorney, which is the sort of prosecutor in Cook County. And under his watch, various allegations of police torture happened. There were investigations, the beginning of lawsuits, etc., and he did nothing. So he's now being sued by some of the attorneys for the survivors of the torture. And after years of trying to get him both to remain as a defendant in the case, which finally a judge has said, yes, he is a defendant, the judge has now agreed with the plaintiff's request that he be subject to deposition. I think it's totally unrelated to our resolution. It's due to the dogged work of some of the determined work of some of the attorneys who have kept on doing the anti-torture work for years and years and deserve a lot of credit for that.
I think we're out of time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Say it, but be quick, because I want them to hear the.
Yeah, well, last semester I interned in Danny Davis's office,
Oh,
and most of the work I did had to do with reintroducing the Law Enforcement Torture Prevention Act.
yeah.
That came out of that. It was HR 5688 is now HR 3781. So, and this is something that people can definitely get involved with because it's national in scope. And well, first of all, there is no domestic definition of torture as it is now. It's internationally defined, but it's not domestically defined. And the Law Enforcement Torture Prevention Act does that. Furthermore, it relates to law enforcement, which is anybody with a badge. So it's not just your local police; it's also border agents, it's the FBI, it's correctional officers, and anybody who's law enforcement. So we've been trying to get some energy behind it to get people involved and get their Congress people and representatives looking at the issue. We have a conference call on Wednesday to further discuss some next step. We had a hearing up on the Hill back in January to discuss the videos online now. There's a website, tortureprevention.blogspot.com, where you can get more information. So we definitely like your help in trying to push that forward.
ICAP definitely supports it.
Yeah.
Well, NERCAP didn't officially support it.
They did push near.
I think they had some issues with the language. However, we do know that LEPA is not going to pass this term. It's just not enough time left in this session, and there's not enough attention to it. So what we've been telling people, still get involved, we're gonna reintroduce it next congressional session, and if there are some adjustments that need to be made, because when I came on board,
So we need to move on.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
We'll get there, that's pretty grand.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for
All right.
coming.
Okay, thank you.